My name is Zarina Zabrisky. I'm a writer based in San Francisco. I'm originally from St. Petersburg, Russia, but I have been living in the West for the last 20 years. The way I came across combat propaganda or military propaganda was actually imposed on me when I was studying in St. Petersburg State University. I was studying at Philological Department, Languages and Literature, but at the time, since we were experts on languages and spoke English, we had to take a compulsory course called Combat Propaganda or Spetspropaganda. We had to go in a separate building, in a separate part of the building that wasn't accessible to anybody else, and it was a high security. We had to have special passes to enter, and everything that we did inside was confidential. Very few people knew that this existed. So once few of us recently started to speak up about it, even the Russian population wouldn't believe us and said, oh, we didn't have it in our university, and they didn't. I did not work in that field at all. I was very happy to forget all about it once I graduated. But sometimes around 2014, I started to recognize the tricks, strategies, and tactics that we were taught in this class. This is not a propaganda per se as people imagine it. When I say propaganda, you probably imagine the big poster from World War I or World War II with a funny-looking Hitler or Stalin and somebody kicking his butt, and cartoons or posters or maybe radio with a booming voice calling people to do something. This is very outdated and obviously doesn't exist anymore because even a child can spot it. I wouldn't even use the word propaganda anymore. What we're talking here is more a mind war, which in turn is a part of a hybrid war. And it's a strategic measure, a special operation that uses a mix of psychological techniques. In fact, it is all based on psychology and some military strategies to demoralize the population and the army of the adversary by using discord and confusion. These days, it is a very sophisticated science that, for example, was used by the Cambridge Analytica here in England and in the United States, micro-targeting the special groups, breaking population into interest groups, and sending the nuanced message.
People you're targeting, you can nuance your messaging to resonate more effectively with those key audience groups.
The modern combat propaganda would identify a group, say British Jews, right, and would deliver the anti-Muslim message, introducing the danger of external enemy and of the immigrants coming into the United Kingdom and taking over their jobs, presenting the security risks, and so forth. On the other hand, the other message could simultaneously go to the British Muslim people, and that could very much target the British Jews. At the same time, there would be messages going to the neo-Nazi groups and very left radical, say Marxist or Trotskyist group. And for each one, the message would be altered and arranged in a way that it would reach and push this group a little bit more towards the extreme. And the goal of such campaign is to split the society and eventually sow a discord. The Kremlin propagandists do not introduce any ideas. Nobody comes here and with a thick Russian accent like myself say like, you guys should now split from the EU or anything like this. They use the ideas that already exist in the society. They do their research, they do their homework, and based on the existing doubts, existing mind frames, develop narratives. And based on this narrative, eventually the society could be driven to complete destruction. And that's the idea of the combat propaganda. These campaigns are extremely successful, and basically what we see now are the results of this campaign. And again, it doesn't mean that the political landscape that we see now was completely imposed on us by the Kremlin. It means that they got us to the results that are desirable to them, using their initial splits and vulnerabilities that we have in our society and that each society has. It is really difficult to identify a well-done campaign because the agents usually use the technique called masquerading, and they're very good at it. So the message is passed by someone who pretends to be, and very well masked to be, one of your own. So if the message is presented to the black people in the United States or in the UK, the account, say on Twitter or on Facebook, would be posing as a black woman, for example, a mother and an activist, and it will be very realistic. And it's virtually impossible to see it. So it is very difficult to figure out where you are being manipulated and where it's someone who has already been manipulated and is unwilling supporter of these measures. However, there is a number of techniques that we can present to the public and educate ourselves and be less helpless when it comes to recognizing a foreign adversary agenda. Sometimes it could be as simple as the slight mistakes in language, slight errors. But at this time, they're very, very good at it, and that is hard to spot. So there would be other linguistic nuances, say emotive words, the words that are repeatedly used to provoke certain emotions. I wrote an article once analyzing the text that was going around on the internet, and it was targeting the Russian immigrant Jews in Brighton Beach in New York. So they would be using words evoking the memories of the World War II and Holocaust, pogroms, and things that trigger that particular population. And these words would be repeated way more than you or I would repeat in our message to our friend. One of the most important concepts to understand is the mechanics behind the brainwashing. And it doesn't apply just to ideology or just to Russian propaganda per se. This is the world-old technique that has been used by shamans from the tribal times on. What happens to the brain, and I'm going to break it down in a very simple way. What happens to the brain when it's in a stress condition? It loses a certain ability to think critically. Just, if you look at it through a scientific mind, through certain tools, you will see that parts of the brain stop working when you are agitated. That's why propaganda was called agit propaganda or agit propaganda in the Bolshevik Russia, because they are going to agitate people. Same is happening in religious conversion. Let's say, as an example, you hear the drum beating and there's a lot of lights going on, like in the fireworks during the military parade. And after a while, your senses are numbed and you are starting to have visions. You just simply cannot operate the way you normally would. And at that point, your brain is very susceptible to implanting new ideas. Because when you're in stress, you would go for a salvation or solution much easier than when you go it when I'm talking to you just like that. So let's say if I would create an enormous amount of noise now and scream at you, you would believe me much better than if I'm just talking to you normally, sort of like in a classroom setting. And so all our media and social media affected by the Russian, the Kremlin propagandist is now operating in a panic mode, on a panic-inducing mode. We see a lot of apocalyptic scenarios and scenes. There are visions of violence, there is something gory, there is something appalling, and it's going on non-stop. A good example, for example, during the Yellow Vests movement in France, the Russian networks RT and Sputnik were reporting 24/7, showing the most gory scenes they could find. Blood, there was a lot of eye injuries and so forth, in the most graphic way possible, way more graphic than other networks. And they were obviously transmitting over YouTube and broadcasted in every possible media that was available to them, on Facebook Live and so forth. And so they basically flooded the information networks with this panic-inducing images, sounds, and stream. And that, at the end, would prepare the groups that were watching these broadcasts to be, let's put it bluntly, brainwashed, or being ready to have certain ideas incepted into their brains. And that's just one of the examples. It's going on now as we speak in the United States. There's no lack of the apocalyptic visions over there with the fires in the West Coast and the protests and the suppression of the protests and so forth. So this is incredibly important to understand. So diminishing the amount of visuals and sounds is probably number one step. Reading something in a quiet room is probably way less dangerous than watching television or YouTube channel, or God forbid, RT YouTube channel. I think the main take-home lesson is not to be emotionally involved or overwhelmed by your social media. Just to know that it is engineered to excite you and to throw you off your guard, so your critical thinking ability diminishes.